Ladies and gentlemen, we take great pleasure in presenting to you the world-famous recording star, Miss Letitia Van Allen and the Van Allen Dancers.
We gotta taste all the fruit. We gotta drink all the wine.
Hell, jail wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't for all those faggots. There's always some fruit after you.
That shouldn't bother you, Rusty.
Well, the whole idea makes me want to puke. A man should act like a man. Know what I mean?
How should a man act?
Untanned, don't leave a thing to shine.
He should ball chicks, that's how.
Go fill your cup.
You know, he's really, he's shameless in intellectual argument. He's absolutely without character, or moral foundation, or even intellectual substance.
Okay, so we are talking about Myra Breckinridge by Gore Vidal tonight. And our guest is Aaron Manhattan, who was just holding up said book. And hey.
Hi.
And so this was interesting because originally we were just going to do it with the three of us, and then somehow we got a special guest. How did this happen, Rio?
Well, Aaron is my dear bosom buddy, and he's like the smartest person that I know. And I was like, I'm doing this podcast on this book. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's by Gore Vidal. And it's called Myra Breckinridge. And he let out a very masculine yelp and said, that's my favorite book. I have to be on the podcast. I have to talk about it. And I was like, yes, 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 come everywhere. Come on. Yeah.
Aaron, we don't really know you as well as Rio does, but would you like to tell us a bit about yourself and what you like to read and before we get into the book?
Yes, I know Rio. I'm sort of beach trade. I met Rio at the beach, and he was really freaked out by me. Didn't speak to me for years, but I guess he's lowered his standards because we hang out all the time these days.
It's true. It's
what
true.
Lockdown does to a motherfucker, you know. Like.
And I'm not that smart, Rio. I just happened to read this book at a very young age, and I think it's given me the kind of aggressive confidence in expressing theories theatrically whilst getting drunk at bars. It makes me seem really smart.
That's all we really aspire to on this podcast.
Well, I look up to you, Aaron.
It was an amazing book. I don't know how it came. I do know how it came into my life. I was at Alice and Gertrude's bookstore in Paddington, and I was about 17, and I'd heard of Gore Vidal, and I knew he was a legendary gay writer. And I was just sort of, cruising around the top floor of this bookstore, which was it's like a terrace house full of secondhand books, and it just kind of, my hand was just drawn to it as if by God itself, and I just pulled it out knowing nothing about it, and then ended up bedridden after an injury and read the whole thing in one go. And it really did change my life. But I'm getting ahead of myself there. I am Aaron Manhattan. I live in Sydney. I do a bit of drag performance here and there. And things I like to read. I'm more of a TV and film person, which is maybe why I like Myra Breckinridge, because it's just relentlessly adulating about films of the 40s. I don't know that many films of the 40s. I always think that's a bit of a joke in the book. They always say that, the best films happened between 1935 and 1950. I completely disagree. The Hays Censorship Code came in 1933. The best films are 1931 to 33. I don't know if that's part of the satire, but I tend to read books about film. I've got this one here, Stardom, the Hollywood Phenomenon. I've got Parker Tyler, Magic, and the Myths of the Movies right here. I've got John Waters' Shock Value. Tend to like very gay books. that talk about films.
Drumwater's Shock Value is a really good book. I love it.
Oh, it's great.
So good.
A tasteful book about bad taste.
Yeah, beautiful. So we've got a bit of kind of a affinity for Myra then with her kind of encyclopedic knowledge of film.
Yes, I would say so. Are you guys fans or are you new to it?
I'd never heard of it before. Matt chucked it on the list. But I think it's fabulous. I think it's hilarious. Particularly the second half when it really starts to ramp up. Like, what the hell is she doing? When she starts talking about Malthus and like her plans for like world domination. I loved it. I loved it so much. I was curious about the ending, but we can get into that later.
Yeah, I'd heard of it, but I'd never read it until this week, and I've read a couple of other of his books, but kind of Gore Vidal is a funny one because I feel like his sort of literary celebrity is what precedes him and what he's more known for than his actual like writing, So, and also being a script doctor on like many, and writing a few scripts on many amazing films too. Suddenly Last Summer is one of my favorite films. That's a really good one. And I think, is he credited? He did write at least part of Ben-Hur, didn't he?
Yeah. He wrote like a decent amount of it, and then I think they didn't they like originally get it taken like off they didn't originally want to credit him or something like that, or they basically booted him off the.
Yeah, because he made it too faggy or something.
Yeah, before he even finished, he basically kicked off the set, and they didn't really want to have anything to do with him or something like that. I can't remember the whole story, but
yeah. But I've always loved his persona. He's the sort of like American, like Oscar Wilde sort of type, like just witty barbs and shit like that. But I actually really enjoyed this novel because it was just really well written. Like the voice was just there, and that was just surprising to me because I was, I was expecting it to be much longer and meandering, and it wasn't, which was. There's a joke in The Simpsons where Lisa gets a book out from the library by Gore Vidal called Tome because he writes these big long books, So that's what I was expecting, but it's actually quite a slim volume and packs a punch.
That's true. I've always struggled to get into Gore Vidal's other books because they're often very historical fiction, often deeply about American politics, which is now very out of date. Or the Roman Empire and things like that, and they're very long and dense. But this one just reads like a dream.
Yeah, like I read it back in. So this is the second time I've read it now. I don't know when I read it first time. Maybe like back in like 2017 or something, like 4 years ago. And yeah, I really enjoyed it like both times reading it. It's weird, like being positioned against like Vidal's other fiction, as you said, like particularly his historical novels. Like you get like 900-page novels about Lincoln, or about Burr, or about whatever. But then he also writes these like dreamlike, trance-like farces, like Myra Breckinridge, Live at Golgotha is another one around like set in the early when it's like 47 BC or something like that, straight up. Maybe it's before Christ, I can't remember. It's very strange novels. But yeah, I guess it's kind of like weird in the way that this is more of such a departure from the rest of his work. And I guess because he wrote it very quickly in like a month or so, and I guess he sort of described it as being like in a trance as well. So maybe that's part of it.
Did any of you ever read his first novel, The City and the Pillar?
No, I'm really curious to get stuck into his biography though. I watched a few interviews, and not just with him, but also with the lead actress of the movie, Raquel Welch, which is amazing. But
have you seen the video of her on the Dick Cavett show with Janis Joplin?
Yes.
And Janis Joplin and Raquel Welch is there, obviously, to spruik the film of Myra Breckinridge. And Janis Joplin's like, I didn't like it. It was too choppy. Too choppy.
Oh.
They were like smoking cigarettes and stuff. What a time to be alive.
I love her.
Too choppy.
I love her response, which is like when she's saying, "Oh yeah, well I've seen the movie 3 times now. You know, the audience is all gay. Oh, I think you were there, Janet." I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Gore Vidal's always had like I haven't actually read The City and the Pillar. I don't think that's his first novel, though. I think that's his second.
Maybe
it's the first big one, I guess.
He wrote Will of War when he was
probably
21 or something like that.
Oh right,
that was his novel based upon his time in the Navy and stuff. And then The City and the Pillar is basically like sort of what people remember as being his first novel. I think
wasn't he like 21 or something?
Yeah, he was
the baby,
very young.
Oh my God, The City and the Pillar is quite great. It's an amazing novel. Just, you know, I think I just sought him out when I was about 17, 18. I was looking for gay writers. And The City and the Pillar was, you know, sort of like a love story, unrequited love story, sort of the literary equivalent of like the gay character in Dawson's Creek's Trial and Tribulations that I'm sure we all bonded with. And it strangely culminates in a rape scene. So I don't know, kind of set the scene there for Myra maybe it was a decade later or something.
But it also doesn't end, like, didn't he originally change the ending?
I think I read the rape one.
Because I think the rape one comes after. Is it the second or the first ending? Because the other ending is where they just kill the character off instead, or something like that, isn't it?
Ceremonial rape as opposed to a literal rape.
Which, of course, you know, wouldn't mirror anything that happens in Myra Breckinridge, of course.
No, not at all. Isn't that funny? I certainly interpreted. That's the way you say the word. At least some of this is like, it felt very like I'm going to examine my own experiences through the lens of this crazy person. Semi-autobiographical. Not autobiographical, more like mental historiography, maybe. Does that make sense? Mapping out how he feels about the world through the lens of a warrior for female virtues.
Yeah, well, in a way, I think he's just... Because I think one of the things that preoccupies him, you've got the American history and all that sort of crap and the political stuff, which is just, I find it very boring too. Like, and doesn't he have like connections to the Kennedys or something?
Yeah.
Like he's related to, what's her name? The first lady.
Like Jacqueline Kennedy was like his sister-in-law or something, basically.
Yeah. It had such a wild life.
Yeah. But anyway, like he also, like, I think this is sort of what you were getting at before, Ruben. He has this weird dichotomy between that kind of real, like, political history sort of vibe, and then he has these sex comedies, like, as well. And I think that's where like all the good stuff is, because he's sort of he explores sex in a really interesting way, and especially in this book, just the kind of spectrum of male to female sexuality, and like Myra is this amazing creature that experiences all of it. Sort of like a Tiresias figure, you know, like has spent time as a male and as a female, and to give a bit of a we don't do spoilers on this podcast, by the way. So,
oh really?
Yeah, so whatever, just but by the end of the novel, Myra is kind of somewhere in between, I guess you would say, or maybe you wouldn't. I don't know.
It's quite androgynous throughout, really. Like it's sort of, you spend like a lot of the novel. What do you mean there's no spoilers? What can I?
No, as in you can spoil. You can talk about anything you want.
Yeah, you can talk about anything you want. It's not. Yeah.
Because it comes as like a revelation when she's a transsexual in the novel.
Yeah.
And it makes sense because she's got this very androgyne kind of voice, this very like, it's like a very gay male or sort of faggot voice a lot of the time, but very arch and drag queeny.
Oh, totally.
And
like a grand dame drag queen, sort of.
Yeah.
Like, I am Myra Breckinridge. You know that sort of
whom
like,
no man may possess.
Me, yeah.
If only the podcast was showing the video as well, they would get to see how attractive we look in our boudoirs right now, scantily clad in bra and panties with the light 1 degree to the right.
Yeah. One day, we'll get there.
Ruben's panties are the skimpiest.
Oh, yeah. It's because they've got so many holes in them. Really, that's the problem.
That's hard. That's a statement. That's a statement you're making.
It's being confident in myself.
Exactly.
You're all very handsome.
Aww.
I don't know if that Dick's comment was true. Sorry, is that a spoiler?
That's a little Easter egg. We'll put in the Patreon version. We don't have a Patreon, but
you definitely need a paywall version.
Yeah, maybe. Like
Rio handles the paywall version anyway. So.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's just pictures of his hog, basically.
Venmo her.
Yeah. So anyway, what were we talking about?
Something.
It's a confusing book to talk about because I've just read it all yesterday and today again, which is now my third time, and it blows my mind every time. And it's a completely different experience reading it this time to when I was younger. I think when I was younger, I totally identified with Myra and was all aboard this crusade of her assaulting the world with her.
Aaron, you froze.
Can we hear each other?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, that's better. You were talking about her assaulting the world. Sorry, I can edit.
Yeah, I was so on board with Myra's assault on the world. She's this shameless character who is performing the whole time, but completely self-aware and constantly admiring and applauding her own performance, which is, I think I just saw it as the definitive camp sensibility of being so self-amused and kind of seeking revenge, maybe even against people who, reading it now, I'm sort of like, do these people really deserve to be attacked and raped? And is that revenge quest really? But at the time, I was with her. I used to be totally with Myra. I think I actually found some scenes quite arousing.
Mm-hmm. So I would be interested to know, because as we mentioned earlier, you do some drag. Has Myra in any way sort of influenced your drag, or did you read it before you got into drag or after? Or
I read it before I ever got into it, and I think it definitely influenced my idea of drag as comic self-creation to relieve one's own boredom or to sort of mix things up.
And obviously, like to terrorize people.
A kind of terrorism, but actually more a kind of honouring of your own film references.
Yeah.
So if people aren't appreciating the reference you're doing, they may feel terrorized. But if they do appreciate it, they will probably feel very seen.
Mm. I love a sin-illiterate queen, so you're speaking my language.
I was talking about I was mentioning how I've been a bit obsessed with the pre-code films of the 1930s during the lockdown and before, of course. Mae West was the queen of the pre-code talkie. I love that she is in this movie. I think it was probably one of the first Mae West movies I ever saw, and, bought the box set and everything after. I probably got it because I wanted to see Raquel Welch. I think I'd seen the Raquel Welch's Space Dance to Age of Aquarius on YouTube, and it was like, who is this Amazon goddess? But Mae West is still present, and I love her in this movie. I find it weird that this movie ever got panned.
Yeah, it's like it has really bad ratings. If you go on like IMDb and like the review aggregates and stuff like that, it's got really terrible ratings. But it's
Gore Vidal
fun.
claims to never even see it.
Yeah, he sort of disowned it, I think.
Which I find really hard to believe, because if he is so obsessed with the movies of the 40s, and I mean, wouldn't Mae West just be the ultimate? She came out of a 27-year retirement to do this film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's some stunt casting right there.
And she writes some of her own lines and adds 2 songs. What more could you want?
Oh God.
I don't know. I really don't understand why Gore Vidal thinks that movie did anything to damage the legacy of the novel. The movie is quite separate from the novel, and it's like the special features if you want to see like what did Rusty actually look like, and like Tom Selleck appears in this movie, and Mae West is in it. It's amazing. I mean, if anything ruined the legacy of the novel, it was the sequel he wrote himself, not that film.
Oh yes, Myron. Have you read it?
I've tried to read it a few times. I've actually never finished it. I appreciate it. I like it, but all of the genius and the brilliance occurred in the first novel, and it almost feels unnecessary to keep going with it.
Mm. Yeah, I've sort of felt the same. I just never, I've never even tried to like bother reading it, even as much as I liked. Like I've read his other novels after this as well, but I just never felt any desire to go back and read another version. Like I don't know. So I've never even like looked into it, like what it's about or anything like that. I kind of don't even want to know what it's about.
It's not as well written. It's more it's not as humorous. There's a general idea about that Myron and Myra have to war over the body that they're in. Who's going to obtain? It's a battle of the sexes within their body, as opposed to, Myra going out into the world and entering an actors college and all this. So it's more within, and they end up going into a TV screen and ending up on the set of a classic camp film, Sirens of Babylon. But there's just so much sort of, there's a lot from Myron's perspective. There's a lot of probably Gore Vidal just being bitchy towards the current government of the time. He, instead of using words like cock, he'll say Rehnquist, which is the name of a high court judge at the time. And there's a lot of this, and it's almost like Gore Vidal going too far with himself when he just got it perfectly right in Myra Breckinridge. And I was happy to stop there, and I have.
Well, that's interesting. That is actually an interesting idea about them being at war with each other in the body. But like, as with most things, it's about the execution, right? But I actually really love it towards the end of Myra. Like, I guess we should sort of talk about what it's about for people that don't know. But
oh my God,
hard to sort of sum up, isn't it? It's about Myra. Myra. Yeah. So Myra Breckinridge is this amazing creature. And she is, the book is basically written as it's like her diary, sort of scribbling down her life as she comes to an acting school or academy where she teaches empathy, which is hilarious because she's a psychopath.
Imposter.
Yes.
Imposter.
And that's one of those details. It's like chef's kiss, like that she teaches empathy. But yeah, she's obsessed, like Aaron says, with the films of the 1940s, and is constantly quoting them. Has this kind of megalomaniac sort of diatribe-y monologue in the way it's written. It's actually, that's why I love it, because the style is just so great. And it's basically like her trying to get I guess the plot such that it is her trying to sort of, is she trying to get control? It's not control of the academy. It's just sort of like getting her share, right?
She has this quest that she's just motivated by. She needs to complete Myra's Myron. So before she was Myra Breckinridge, she was a gay film critic called Myron in New York who was seeing a psychologist called Dr. Randolph, who was really into cruising straight trade and would, humiliate himself sexually in order to get what he wanted. Whereas now, incarnate as Myra, he has all the power of the feminine body and glamour that he can now exact. It becomes a quest for revenge for the humiliations of Myra and to destabilize heterosexuality in general, especially the heterosexual male.
Yes, and that in the key scene, I think, is when she does that to Rusty, one of the, white bread sort of like actors at the school, who is ostensibly straight, but she molests so much that he eventually becomes gay. So not so much. She molests. She molests so vigorously that he becomes gay.
Uh-huh. She makes him hate women.
Yeah. So there's that. That's basically sort of what happens, and then there's this whole sort of subplot, with her trying to get kind of her share of the academy and her taking revenge, as you say, and then eventually what happens is she kind of gets into a situation where her transition to womanhood is reversed, and she becomes Myron again at the end, but a very different Myron. So that's basically what it is. There's not much plot. It's just because it's very voice based, the writing. Like, it's just about her and what she, like, her observations, and it's just really funny. Yeah.
But I find it incredible that this came out in 1968, because if I think about like the sort of transsexual, transgender, or drag queen icons of that period, I think more about sort of Candy Darling or Holly Woodlawn or Jackie Curtis, or certain like Warhol heroines, which were, I guess, in the 60s, maybe around the same time. And then by the 70s, you have sort of like the John Waters figures like Divine. But I just think that Gore Vidal was amazingly insightful to be on the same page as so many of these really outsider artists, and able to speak in their voice, presumably all from his own brain, which makes me wonder: is that the gay male brain all along? Like, is he like lifting the lid of a lot of repression, or is he just brilliantly satirizing the sexual revolution that was occurring in the 1960s? I mean, this is pre-Stonewall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
1 year pre-Stonewall, and only 8 years after the pill.
I mean, I wonder, like, that makes it certainly feels in that way, this kind of transitionary period between...
No pun intended, obviously.
Hey, periods are transitionary. Between kind of like the two kind of pivotal civil rights movements, like, or events of like the pill being introduced and Stonewall. When was Roe v. Wade? That's kind of the thing. I'm going to Google
I think that was later.
Was it?
I think that might have been. I'm going to guess 74.
What was
73?
Very good.
That's. But like, this certainly feels like part of that kind of it's part of the movement. And I think when we kind of engage with texts that are pre-Stonewall, like homo texts, queer narratives, pre-Stonewall, we kind of very much expect, and certainly pre-AIDS, pre-HIV, we kind of expect this insane conservatism that wasn't necessarily there. It's just written in a language that is not maybe certainly with kind of today's understanding of transgender, identity and health issues. Some parts of this maybe don't gel. And I say gel because like it's just like almost a completely separate understanding of gender. I was reading comments on their interview with Raquel Welch and this interview with Raquel Welch and it was from about 9 years ago. And this person should remake this with Lady Gaga as the lead.
Oh my God.
and honestly, Lady Gaga from 9 years ago.
Lady Gaga raped R. Kelly with her phallus during the video clip of Do What You Want.
It would be like a horribly reviewed camp classic.
It wouldn't be because I don't actually think that Hollywood is capable of camp anymore. It would be like burlesque, which is like trying to be camp, but it's, you know, it never quite gets there. I mean, I enjoy it, but like, you know what I mean? Like you kind of need a sort of, people aren't arch enough to do camp successfully anymore. Not in Hollywood anyway. Arch.
Well, that's what I mean. There's if it were made 9 years ago when this comment was made, maybe. If it were made now.
Well, who would you? That's actually one of my questions that I was going to ask. Like, if you remake, because we're kind of talking about the book and the movie, like interchangeably. That's fine. But if you were going to recast it today, and you were going to make Myra Breckinridge, who would you cast as Myra?
Oh, me.
Shade that.
It needs to have it needs some trans representation.
Does it?
Well, apparently Candy Darling was being considered for the role at the time. She had been in a couple of Warhol films and was always aiming at becoming a movie star and was being considered for this. I think it was down to her and Raquel Welch. And the world just wasn't ready. And I do imagine that Candy Darling would have done an incredible job.
Totally.
That would have been,
it's
already groundbreaking as a book. It would have been a groundbreaking film if that occurred as well.
Absolutely.
It would have been a first for a lot of
it's funny. With like the cast and the way, because, you know, in the movie, as opposed to the book, which is, you know, apart from several asides from our B main character, Myra's uncle.
Uncle owner.
Uncle owner.
I like those sections I just heard in like this. I don't know why, like we get a very twang.
Tight. You know, we get a very kind of tight viewpoint from Myra, and in the film, we kind of see Myron like walking around, like in Myra's kind of mind's eye, and there are a couple scenes where Myron appears as Myra. So it kind of like feels like Raquel Myra, like she isn't what people are seeing. She's kind of like what she appears how Myra believes she appears. You know, she's kind of like a fantasy layer on top of the movie. She's, you know, this like incredibly hot, you know, Amazonian, almost, you know, white Amazonian babe.
She's not white.
Any man would love to.
I think she's Colombian.
Oh, well.
I think she would have been considered. I think she would have been considered Latinx in her day, and you know, it's the exotic Raquel Welch.
Oh,
with the, you know, I think there was always rumors that she had ribs removed to achieve that waistline, but she has the ideal body of the, you know, of the transsexual. In a way, it's just so high. There's incredible breast, incredible butt, tiny waist, hair for days. I mean, she's exactly what you'd want to be. And that's kind of what I love about her casting in the movie, because she's just too amazing to even be a woman in the first place, even though she completely is. She has a wig line these days.
You're clocking it, are you?
There's incredible videos on YouTube of Raquel's Welch wig ads.
Awesome.
They get advertised sort of on like a Janel's Direct type thing.
No one outside of Australia is going to know what that means.
Sorry, this is an international podcast.
This is an international podcast.
International podcast.
Yeah.
Janel's Direct, you know, the equivalent of QVC.
Yeah, shopping on like cable shopping. Is that what it is? Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I really liked your point, Ario, about her being in the movie, at least being like this ideal projection. That's really cool. I like that because, and I actually was listening to a podcast a couple of days ago that was talking about narcissism, and it talked about, and I heard a good description of it, that it's like narcissism is the ever widening gap between your actual self and your ego ideal. And I feel like that somehow is relevant to what you're talking about there, because like it's almost like Raquel Welch is the ego ideal that Myra is trying to embody. That's a really interesting reading of the film, actually. I never thought about it like that.
She actually is somebody who would have just had incredible power over men. You can just imagine Raquel Welch.
It's funny because, you know, oh, absolutely. Oh my God. And the interview that I watched her, and she just like does not let the interviewer say a word, basically. And every time he speaks, she says, you know, she's like, no, stop. It's me. Me. The changing of the ending, I felt kind of solidified that a little bit as well, because in the novel, dear listeners, towards the end of the novel, you know, Myra's kind of conquest of Rusty and men, this you know, young hung stud from
this young buck that she broke,
but fuck nowhere, you say, who she buck broke. You know, she kind of like is like repelled. She starts to become repelled by men and wants to dominate women instead. And she starts kind of to fall in love with Rusty's partner, Marianne, another student at the academy that she's teaching at. But before she can kind of enact any plan to kind of make Marianne hers, she's struck by a car. And reading about this was actually like the kind of genesis scene of the book, which kind of surprised me a little bit. Well, you know, one of the genesis scenes where you know, Gore Vidal heard of a trans woman, a transsexual woman being struck by a car and having to detransition because they had to remove her breasts because the silicone was at risk of entering her bloodstream. And he was like, oh, that's amazing. And it kind of like spun at least part of the story from it. So that happens to Myra. And so at the end of the novel, she decides to detransition, stop taking stop taking hormones, and ends up marrying Marianne and living a happy life, or, you know, relatively happy heteronormative life.
Two dogs instead of their
instead of children. which was a bit, it's a bit
well, it's prescient, isn't it? It's like,
yeah,
that's most millennial couples now, isn't it? They have fur babies instead of real babies.
Yeah. But you know,
it's so sad, the ending when she loses her reg. So it starts talking about the dogs and the Chinese food delivery. Can barely remember the actresses of the 1940s film. Tragic ending.
Yeah, that's what's it's reflected in the way that it's written too, which is so great. It's so like boring and dull, like just to read, compared to Myra's stuff, which is just sort of like this kind of,
particularly like the last line you get of like from Myra. So it's like, where are my breasts? Where are my breasts?
Where are my breasts?
Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah, then in the film they've changed it to you know, it was all a dream. Myron was just in a car crash, and he dreamt everything that happened. But they do add this line just before the car crash where Myron says to Myra, you couldn't hack it in black and white, so you decided to live in Technicolor. Which I thought was a very good addition. Very interesting and something to think about, just because, like, there's kind of no, in the film, Myra gets to actually be alive and be a person in the book. And then in the film, Myra is just an ideal, a fantasy that Myra never actually got to enact out.
And that's probably, I think, why Gore Vidal has problems with it, because I think that for it to be like an effective, but a great sort of piece of kind of literature, it's sort of, she has to be real. Like, she can't be a figment of someone's imagination. And like the whole, what is engaging with there with like the fluidity of sex and gender and shit like that, that can't just be like someone's imagination. It has to be embodied in Myra. And that's why the book is so great, because it is embodied in Myra and her crazy, insane sort of journey, And
if anything,
I completely agree.
The level of like projection, if you wanted to think about like that, the book itself is kind of like Vidal's own projection, right? So you've already got like both layers. You don't really need anything more than that.
Yeah, and we should remember as well that Gore Vidal has worked in Hollywood, so he's very aware. He would be very aware that things change in adaptation and blah 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 blah. You can't always be kind of faithful to the text and stuff. But it's like, I don't get why that change was made, to be quite honest. Like, it doesn't. Is it to make her more palatable to audiences or something?
Yeah, I was going to say, like it sounds like kind of like a, like almost like a strange kind of like censorship in a weird way, like, to make it palatable. You say you've got to be like, well, this doesn't actually exist. This sort of stuff only exists in dreams and stuff. It doesn't actually exist in reality in that sort of weird way. But at the same, it just sort of feels maybe because as much as it's a book about films, I think it almost needs to be a book about films. And I think that's one of the reasons why it doesn't necessarily translate to film that well, because it's something that it's almost like parodying the visualization of culture as well. And the fact that the visualization of the film adaptation bastardized in a certain way the fundamental aspect of the novel is almost like what's what I'm like pointed or is appropriate. That's what I'm looking for. In a weird way.
Maybe in 1970 they didn't think that trans women could pass well enough for this to actually be pulled off, and I think they were proved wrong.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's just like, it's one of those weird ways.
At the time, people are even suspicious that Mae West herself was actually a man in drag. So Raquel said that. Raquel actually famously said that. She said, I was never convinced that Mae West wasn't actually a man.
Well, Mae West may not have been a man, but she was definitely a drag queen.
Indisputably.
She was definitely a self-creation in the same vein as Myra Breckinridge. She just knew what needed to be done. She felt completely righteous in her purpose, which actually was also to realign the sexes and to make way for the next stage. Mae West was the queen of treating sex as a comedy rather than a tragedy where women were the victim. And Raquel Myra Breckinridge takes that completely to the next level, but then also kind of turns back on itself a bit, because after Myra has conquered man, she then ends up falling under the spell of Marianne and becoming completely disinterested in her former mission and actually interested in things like love.
Will we say that it's a spell that Marianne has, though?
It's more the mystery it's more the uterine mystery that she becomes fascinated by.
She wants to plumb her depths.
That's right. She ends up saying that male genitals are just obvious as part of the mystery and magic of life.
Well, she's a classical archetypal siren, with her beautiful voice that captivates her and, lures in the poor, unknowing Myra Breckinridge. She has no idea what she's getting herself into with poor Mary.
She's a siren, as are you, Ruben. And in fact, as are you, Matthew, and you, Rio, on this pod, luring listeners in.
I think we lure them away, if anything.
I said there's no such thing as a gay person, I hate that adjective, or a straight person. They're just people. There is a gay activity, and there is a straight activity. But you cannot identify a person by that and say, oh, he's a gay person because he does that. Yeah, but what about when he's not doing that? What is he then? Latent? It's a difficult concept for a country which believes in either or and has no sense of what is, which is both. I have tried for at least 55 years to explain this.
I'm wondering if any of you folk are aware of the Myra Breckinridge, Camille Paglia connection.
I read the foreword that she wrote, but what's the connection outside of that?
Right.
I wasn't aware of it.
So I'm definitely a Camille Paglia fan, and I think her style is what attracts me most. That she always makes me laugh. She's always extremely provocative. She always says things that she kind of dares you to say, oh my God. I mean, it often feels so true. She's got very persuasive and charismatic and erudite and has constant references and tangents in the same way that Myra speaks. And so when Camille Paglia's Sexual Personae first came out in, I think it was 1990 or something, Time magazine jumped on it and got all these quotes from other authors. And Gore Vidal was one of the first people to comment. And he said, Camille Paglia sounds like Myra Breckinridge on a roll, and I have no higher praise.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there's actually interesting kind of connections there as well in that didn't Harold Bloom think Myra Breckinridge was one of the greatest novels of the 20th century, and Harold Bloom was her supervisor when she was doing her doctorate.
Yeah. He, being the person who reads too much Bloom all the time, he sort of put Myra Breckinridge in that class of American apocalyptic novels along the lines of Nathaniel West's Miss Lonely Hearts, Pynchon's Crying Out Block 49, those sort of things, like weird, like shot out of hell type works. And also like kind of saw Sexual Persona as being like a weird Paterian like prose poem almost in a weird way.
Yeah, and I definitely get what you say about like the cadence and the rhythm of it is very Paglia-esque, if that's a word, because you can imagine Myra Breckinridge talking at like lightning speed, just like Camille Paglia. It's like, and I think as an Italian, it's a very an Italian thing because Italian women are like, and it's sort of like, and I think that's what she's got there. But like the Myra Breckinridge thing, I think, yeah, you can imagine her speaking really fast, like, and
interestingly, like Paglia as well, like from hearing interviews with her, she's talked about how one of the reasons, I mean, obviously, the time she grew up, it's a much different time, but she never sort of, was attracted to like identifying in a sort of trans way because for her, language was that. She didn't have to like sort of act out anything in reality. What she could do was explore any like different possibilities within language itself, which in a weird way is kind of what Vidal is doing in here, even if it's not the way that Myra Breckinridge herself is sort of acting things out.
You ever heard the concept of the hyperstition?
No.
It's the Landian, Nick Land's thing about like how you have things in culture that are usually fictional but make it happen in real life. It's almost like Myra Breckinridge is the hyperstition of Camille Paglia.
Who said that, sorry?
Nick Land.
Nick Land. And when was that?
Oh, I can't remember when he said it, but it's like a concept of his. He's a really out there sort of philosopher.
Fascinating. Well, I would agree with that, but I would actually attribute that to Oscar Wilde, who questions, does art imitate life or does life imitate art? And I would say that Myra Breckinridge is extremely Oscar Wildean in its sort of savagery and also its dandyism. It's got this very kind of, I'm above the rules, but I'm also making an absolute show of it that dares you to question me kind of approach. And the audience is very much left reeling. They're shocked by the morals that are being, the moral laws that are being broken in the book, but also question themselves a lot. And, I've actually got this book here that is from a guy called Reed Woodhouse. It's called Unlimited Embrace, and he's a professor from the University of Massachusetts. And he actually says here, one might say that Vidal had virtually invented Camille Paglia. Such an invention would have delighted Paglia herself, confirming her Wildean belief in the power of literature to anticipate mere life. Like Paglia, Myra is monstrously self-pleased, opinionated, arrogant, sexually anomalous, and a self-creation.
I was thinking as well, like, with the Wilding connection as well, you have the other Wild sentence, just something like a sense of colour matters more than a sense of right and wrong. Which is definitely the case in this novel, I feel. A lot of colour, not much... and
the wild thing is definitely something that would be a comparison that Vidal himself would welcome, I think, because I think he kind of, even if he probably never said it, he kind of styled himself as a bit of an American like heir to Oscar Wilde. Like he would come, like I just love that he would live in Italy for most of the year when he was still alive, and would fly over to the US for a couple of months a year whenever he had a book to sell, and would just like critique the entire country and just like be really kind of bitchy and witty in those critiques. And it's like I feel like he kind of perhaps viewed himself very much as an heir to Oscar Wilde, in the same way that Paglia might as well, I guess.
Absolutely, and it's that whole sensibility. And that's what I find so radical about this book, because in the 1960s you had, what other 1960s gay writers would be there? There'd be maybe James Baldwin, and I guess Tennessee Williams sort of come to mind. And in their writing, Capote, but, I think, in this pre-Stonewall period, it's been said that gay men looked different. They actually hung their heads lower and they had a sense of shame about themselves. And there was certainly a lot of shame that was being extrapolated in the literature. You sort of see this in Giovanni's Room, whereas there's no shame in this book. This is completely all about style and a sense of humor and a sense of creation and design and a devil may care thing. And that maybe is the savagery of the camp in this, because it's so remorseless and so funny. And this is, what Camille Paglia has said in later years, that this is what she always liked about gay men, and that she's very upset that gay men have, in her opinion, lost the scathing sense of humor and the total lack of sentimentality when they're telling the truth. And so this book is kind of, I think, the epitome of that.
Sorry, you said Paglia said they've lost a sense of sentimentality.
She's got an essay called No Law in the Arena, where she talks about gay men's contribution to the culture. And she said that one of the main things was their sense of humor and a lack of sentimentality, which I guess is not being seduced by wishy-washy ideas of love or being nice, when the other option is to say something that's true, however cutting it is. So, you become promiscuous, not because it enhances your love life, but it does sharpen thought to some level. And you kind of really see that in Myra Breckinridge. I mean, it's almost like some of the scenes, it's almost like watching a gay porno, because it's just like a camera lens on a scene. There's no empathy for Rusty's feelings. He is seen as this hot piece of meat, but there's also these really beautiful, quite lurid and tasty descriptions of his, iridescent white butt cheeks and the rosebud in the center, and it has this mythical approach to his body, but it's also just viewed really coolly. And in fact, that whole scene takes place in an infirmary, and she's acting like the doctor. It's like, what's that porn site with the college boy physical? Predicted that by 30 years. It's such a guilty pleasure. It's completely amoral and unsentimental.
Yeah, definitely. That's the and that's similar to that. I remember I've just been looking for the quote, but she says something. I mean, she's got a lot of great lines. Like Myra she's got a line per page. But one early on, I think, which sort of gets to this sort of kind of camp, gay, bitchy, no hold bar thing is when she talks about literature itself and like the form that she's using. And she's like, she says, more than ever, I'm convinced that the only useful form left to literature in the post-Gutenberg age is the memoir, the absolute truth, copied precisely from life, preferably at the moment it is happening. And that just sort of suggests that kind of like, that kind of queen who's just spitting the truth left, right, and center, doesn't care, doesn't give any fucks. And and that kind of gives you a sense of, this is where this novel's going. and it pretty much is. It lines up with that kind of Parlier-esque kind of idea of the gay man.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure it's a satire on types of literature that we're trying to be very detailed and accurate, that we're trying to claim they had access to the truth through detail. You guys are the experts on the literature here. I'm not sure what's that called, like the Roman novel or something like. I don't know, but it seems to be like a scathing attack on that, because it's like
it's a bit of satire on the Nouveau Roman, the Rob Grill. And she talks about Rob Grill a little bit in here. I probably butchered the pronunciation of that, but that's okay. But yeah, I like that line that you brought up, Matt, as well, because like just before that as well, I almost see it like as, and we're going to talk a little bit about like whether or not this still holds up as a novel today. And I feel like in this way, it's like almost like maybe more pertinent today as a satire on like contemporary focus on identity and that sort of stuff as well. She starts off by talking about like right at the beginning of the novel, basically, like the novel being dead. There was no point to writing made up stories, and that she writes this book because her doctor, the psychologist, has told her that I write in this notebook as therapy. That's the main reason for writing anything right now. So write memoir, write the absolute truth. Don't try and write any fiction, of course. And
wow, that sounds familiar, Ruben.
Yeah, great level of irony. But like also the very fact that she'll teach irony and posture as well, and that she's talking to this. She's talking to these people who've been like completely overweened and raised on television and everything, so that she has to teach them empathy, has to teach them how to speak, has to teach them posture because they don't even know the language anymore. They don't know how to do anything at all. But I love the idea that she taught, as I think one of my favorite quotes from the book, because like television, and this is like maybe the parody of that sort of Wildian perspective that life actually mirrors art rather than the other way around. When she talks about the fact that televisions and movies are basically real life now. They're not. There's no real life anything. It's just all mediated through television or whatever. And that sort of represents her ultimate reality in many ways, where like if the world of like television and movies is the real world, then you can actually engage in this sort of putting on of masks all the time. You don't have to be yourself anymore. You can be whatever you want to be. It sort of reaches that pinnacle. And you have the great line, which is like, could the actual Christ have possessed a fraction of the radiance and the mystery of hateful honor as King of Kings, or revealed even on the cross so much as a shadow of the moonstruck Nemi agony of Geoffrey Hunter and the second King of Kings, the astonishing creation of Nicholas Ray? No. But that's the way we live now. A perfect tonic to our identity obsessed age, I guess.
Well, yeah, that's what I want. That's what I guess what I think we'll end on is like how it's aged. Given that, like, I think this novel is a critique of this idea of like a static kind of holy identity that seems to be like de rigueur now, because it's all about like who you are throughout your life is never the same. You know, it's constantly changing and churning, and sometimes through circumstance, sometimes through your own actions and things like that. And I think that's basically what the book's about. So I feel like it probably feels, I don't know, it's almost taboo in the current climate.
And like particularly in relation to like sexual identity as well. Like, as like Paleo talks about in the introduction, at least the copy we read, Vidal basically believed that everyone was just naturally bisexual, and that like homosexuality or heterosexuality weren't identity constructs or anything like that. They had nothing to do with your identity. They were just acts that you performed. But that, you know, society sort of has created them into identity categories for whatever different kinds of reasons, and that you sort of need to abolish that in a certain kind of way. But then I think like the way that, you know, one of the other parts of the satire as well is that even when we do get to that point of breaking down those identity categories, as it happens in the novel, it becomes almost like a farce as well, and it can like easily lend itself to that kind of farce. In like, you know, where you have to like teach people how to empathize. You have to teach like with the empathy quote where she's like, "I invite them to pretend they are oranges, drinks of water, clouds," so on and so forth.
There's this really funny line. I think it's when she meets Letitia Van Allen, who we haven't really spoken about apart from Mae West, who plays Letitia in the film, who's this kind of extravagant, highly sexual talent agent who kind of plays a large part in the second half of the novel. But when Myra and Letitia meet, they have this like immediate kind of like spark. They know that they're each other's kind of people, and Myra, says, unfortunately, she's one of those dreaded monosexuals, or something like that. And I was like, monosexual? What? And I kind of had to like think. I'm like, oh, right. She doesn't mean like heterosexual. She just means like will only have sex with one sex. And kind of, the way that Vidal kind of like positions sexuality in that way. Because that is not a word that is used in kind of contemporary identity speech at all, and yet I think, and you know, may have something to do with the dreaded bi-erasure. Those people who don't exist, because we think of like homo and heterosexuality as kind of this effusive, essential part of our being, as opposed to just kind of, you know, acts that we may or may not perform with the body that we have, and kind of, you know, we've never, we don't in contemporary kind of culture really, you know, explore the binary between mono and bisexual. And I know like Myra's kind of saying it almost as like a jab and like a barb, kind of ironic barb, but I don't know. I stuck with that a little bit.
Because I guess you've got like the two different perspectives, at least in like today's culture, where you have, I guess, the left more or less not, you know, upholding the more with different kinds of sexual identity as being something that can be, and maybe this is like, you know, pragmatically this has been maybe a good thing, but it's maybe gone too far or whatever, where like identity is so or your sexual identity is so crucial to your actual identity or to your essential identity or anything like that. And of course, you know, the right will take up, you know, as counter to that, you know, the essentiality of your heterosexual identity, because, you know, without that, you know, we can't propagate species or whatever, like that kind of stuff. I feel like Vidal just sort of comes in and like tries to piss off everyone, more or less.
Vidal's definitely an attack on decency. But at the same time, in the I think it's the 1994 introduction, he refers to Myra/Myron by they them pronouns. So that seems modern. It could be, maybe he is progressive in that way. I don't think Vidal actually believed in homosexuality as an identity. I think he thought of homosexual acts, and I think he mainly thought of them as something you commit with someone that you pay. Yeah. But at the same time, he totally has this intellectual and comedic sensibility, which is like quintessentially gay as well, and that isn't really an identity, but kind of a
I mean, we don't really have like words for the differences between like if you're gay, that seems to, it supposedly encompasses like a cultural kind of ethnicity, as well as sexuality. And like the only word that I and my coterie kind of use to kind of differentiate the two is faggotry versus gay.
Which is elitist, which is what Gore Vidal is.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing with him as well, is that I feel like, because he's on record a lot, people ask him about like homosexual love and stuff like that, but he's more about sex than love. And so he's talking about, I think he resists the heterosexualization of faggotry, like that, you can do gay things and you don't need to settle down with like a gay equivalent of a wife sort of thing. Like he's more in that style.
That's right.
Yeah, he's not.
Well, he longs for that. He absolutely longs for that, pre-Stonewall world where, I think he would think that gay identity has made straight men more afraid of exploring their gay side than ever before. And he would probably long for a time, he was in the Navy, was it in World War II? He would long for the time where a famished / peckish homosexual could cruise the docks and potentially perform oral sex on a heterosexual sailor who is particularly horny. And there's a very beautiful chapter in the book where he talks about the he mythologizes this experience as stealing the semen, the life force, away from a more deserving woman, stealing it away from the natural order of things, and it becomes this precious object, the cock itself and the juice. And in a world where where heterosexuality doesn't exist, that experience could never occur. In a world where heterosexuality isn't supreme, that thrill couldn't really occur. I almost think he relishes in the existence of the rules and hierarchies and gender differences to a huge degree. I think he thinks they're more fun, and like the rules are certainly meant to be broken, but they certainly exist.
And that like I think in the book as well, like Myra talks about in relation to the sailors and that kind of lifestyle, cruising lifestyle. He talks about like Hart Crane as well being the cruising gay poet.
Human ashtray kind of situation.
yes. Or, before he threw himself off into the Gulf of Mexico.
Oh yeah, the kind of masochism in this novel, this kind of undercurrent of masochism that's kind of only really realized with on page with Letitia is high. Myron loved to be hurt. He loved to be beat up, and
hooked up the arm.
But he loved to be beaten up. He loved when men would beat him up when he asked them. He's like, "You want to fuck? No, you a faggot, mate. I'll fuck you up." He's like, "Yes." And then Myra is very much a sadist.
Absolute dominatrix.
That might be a thing about like particular gay men of that generation, but also of that class, because that was a big thing with Kenneth Anger as well. Like his I don't know if you guys have seen it, but his first film Fireworks is essentially, which is a very, very, very early gay film. Like it's a short film. Mm-hmm. It's essentially a black and white film of him like cruising and then getting beaten up by sailors. So like there's maybe it's like a thing. It was a thing back then. And
it was a thing. My use of
it's still a thing now.
Ashtray. My use of the term human ashtray 5 seconds ago is absolutely lifted from Kenneth Anger's Hollywood Babylon. He says that that's how James Dean was found at the end, covered in cigarette burns.
Probably semen too.
Probably a bit of semen.
Yeah. That's the T, and that's the G.
And that's the pun that always matters.
Yeah.
I don't know. You know, one thing about this book that really fucked me up, though, because I'd read it too young. I'm still too young, really. Don't know if my skin will show up on this podcast. Yeah. But I actually, you know, as a drag queen, it took me years to kind of realize that there's actually, like, you know, there's the world of drag queens and there's also the world of trans women. And I used to sort of think they were all showgirls. And maybe that was like a result of reading a book like this, where it's so camp and it's this completely self-aware performance. And maybe there was an idea in the 60s that trans women were drag queens that had gone too far, and like Myra's the ultimate drag queen gone too far. But, you know, it was a real disappointment for me to meet trans women who didn't consider themselves artistic, self-creative on a constant 24/7 basis, and who weren't always up for a side eye and a wink.
It's like a really, there's no point in the book where Myra is off. She's always on. It's always a performance, and that really kind of niggled at me. That it really, in many times, it felt like, you know, reading. Am I reading a gay man pretending to be a woman? You know, or, you know, putting on
Chad meme, yes.
Yes. Look, it's like, you know, is that Gore Vidal coming through? Or am I reading like a woman who is free and self-righteous, and I don't think that tension is ever really resolved.
It is and it isn't. Like, so the whole time, you know, Myra's this very transsexual creation. She's in the incredible, you know,
oh my God, the opening
world-shattering body of a woman that Raquel Welch perfectly has. But she also has no empathy, and she's not maternal, and she's constantly cruel, and she constantly objectifies herself and everyone around her. And, you know, she says, you know, you could say quite racist things about some of the people at the academy. She refers to lesbians as lay girls, talks about them, you know, seducing women in their Oldsmobile. She refers to, like, a fellow black staff member as darkness at night. Like, she's constantly got this, you know, objectifying lens on the world. She has contempt for the Trobriand Islanders. You know, she's really kind of, you know, in this way. But at some point in the novel, and it's actually after she rapes Rusty, that something changes in her. She feels that she's conquered. And even a psychiatrist realizes that she's moving into a new psychological stage. And she says at one point, I must have Marianne, but only if she wants me. Only if she will have me. And she suddenly has this new idea of empathy or consent or love in her brain. And it's almost like that's the male brain dying off and her truly becoming Myra and becoming a lesbian.
And one of the ways I read the novel as well, and this, I guess, comes down to this constant set of like transformations that happen throughout it, is that it's very much like a parody or a satire of like a Nietzschean narrative. Of, like, you know, the Nietzschean narrative is like particularly like a masculine Übermensch type narrative. This is like the feminine Übermensch type narrative, but like taken to its like extreme point. Like, she's always talking about like the will to power, and like all that matters is power in the world. And then it like sort of like caves in on itself by the end of the novel. And of course, you know, the ultimate will to power is being, you know, basically killed by a bus at the end of the novel, you know, the mechanized state.
Or, you know, you go from being Myron to then enabling Letitia Van Allen to be, you know, thrown down a set of stairs and raped with a coat hanging around her neck, and not needing sex anymore because she's achieved her life goal.
Well, no, you got to get it correct though. I mean, she not only does she get pushed down the stairs, but she orgasms at the point of falling down the stairs and like breaking everybody, paralyzing
kicking the banister. Yes. I don't know if Mae West ever achieved that in real life. I don't know. I think she seemed to like to be in control and have the men as the backup dancers.
I think she would have.
You think she would have?
Yeah.
Come up and see me sometime.
Sometime, yeah.
Actually, come down and see me from at the bottom of the stairs.
All right. Do we have any final thoughts on Myra?
I just wanted to, like, at one point I did want to, like, bring up at some point. This is how wonderful this academy is.
Oh my god!
Yes,
Oh my god!
Like, it is like the biggest Ponzi scheme I think I've ever seen.
Holy!
It's like, oh yeah, we're going to get them all to play. We're just going to try and get as much money as we can from them. We've got like thousands of students here who are all paying tuition. They can just stay. This guy's been here. Whatever his name, he's been there for like 14 years or something. We'll just get them to play on our closed circuit TV programs. It's a perfect life. It's basically like academia, but of more jazz.
Oh god, that the academy, like reading that scene made me go, oh god, anyone who's ever been to an acting school is going to absolutely like crumple as I did.
Did you go to acting school?
Yes, I did.
Which school? Meisner?
It is a
Method?
It is Stanislavski. No, Stanislavski and Meisner. Both, a mixture. What are my thoughts on Myra? It is a really fun book. I feel like I kind of learned a bit from this. There we go. That's a nice thing. I probably looked up more things reading this book than I have in a book in a very, very long time, and that made me happy. And I've got like several to be read on the pile. Vidal's kind of like obsession with like using real people and lends this kind of verisimilitude to the book, where like it's absolutely like it's a fantasy world, but it's also like a Hollywood, and this kind of society that he lives in was this fantasy world, and the kind of political kind of, I say political, I mean societal kind of changes going on seem like fucking ridiculous to him, and kind of using these kind of real world larger than life characters that is constantly Myra is constantly relating herself to and talking about, and grounding it in the Parker Tyler and this kind of academic kind of it's good. It's good.
Yeah, she's my like academic hero, basically. She's constantly, if you think about it, like in relation to any sort of like academic, she's making constant references to not just like the books and stuff like that, but also to make sure that you reference every different actor just to show off how smart you are, just to show how your references are. Like at first, like rereading it, I was thinking that maybe
it kind of
I was just like back to try and like answer the question around what do you call whether or not it's still relevant or it still holds up today. I was trying to think like, well, is the fact that like I don't get like half these movie references, or probably more than half, like enough to make it like not hold up or make it more of a period piece? And I just sort of realized that, well, no, because like half the characters don't get the references, or all the characters don't really get any of the references. And it's like, that's the point, to sort of like, supposed to like go over the fact that you don't get any of these references. And it's just like, her trying to play out that she has like this erudite knowledge about stuff that no one really like has any memory of.
They could all have been like not real people. In fact, it was funny because I got to a point where I was just like, every time like a new name came up, I'm like, oh, who's this actor? I was looking up a Randolph Montag, a psychologist. I'm like, oh, this is not a real person.
He's not a real psychologist. I reckon that's a bit of a play on Susan Sontag.
That's what I was thinking too. Yeah, that would be appropriate.
He might have got sued if he wrote Susan Sontag into the book, so he did Randolph Montag as a I love his. I think that's what I love most about the book. It's just interest in detail. That is sort of Myra's superiority in a way. She has this mastery of the aesthetic detail of the situation that is culminated in her body the way it is. She stays awake during her own sex change, and she is just
It's
able to
competent.
filter
High
everything
level of competency.
through the mythology and the psychology of the movies as dreams that inform. And it is just actually true that there's always been these periods that have been of fascination to, gay men, I would say probably a lot of other people, but there's like the silent films of the pre-30s, a lot of them have been lost. So things that people would have obsessed about then disappear. Fran Lebowitz talked in that, Pretends the City documentary and before that, how AIDS killed a certain type of homosexual audience that actually allowed a certain type of art to flourish. At one point in time, you could have 50 gay men at the opera every week just hanging off every subtle gesture of the ballerina. And when this audience died, that art form changed and everything's become more homogenized, more heterosexualized. He's obsessing about these particular movies. He's asserting this gay cultural world as being relevant and beautiful and incredible. And, I'm sure it's just transformed somehow. But I like anyone that's kind of, fighting that fight. Gore does it quite proudly, even if he has to transition to do it.
Wonderful.
Wonderful way to end on it.
Beautiful.
So it's a wonderful book, and the film was shamed. It was probably too much transphobia at the time. I don't know, but it's a brilliant film. It's one of Mae West's greatest performances. I love her singing, "You gotta taste all the fruits, you gotta drink all the wine, you gotta sow every oat, you gotta shake every vine." Not since 1933 has she been so glorious.
That was perfect because of the distortion in the microphone.
I'll do it again.
No.
Baby, here I am. I'm a girl on the scene. I can give you what you want, but you gotta come home with me. I've got some real good loving and I've got some in store. When I get through throwing it on you, you gotta come back for more. Girls and things will come by the dozen. That ain't nothing but drugstore loving. Good-looking thing, let me light your candle, 'cause baby, I'm sure how to handle. Yes, I am. Actions speak louder than words, and I'm a girl with a great experience. I know you had you another, but I can love you better than any other. Take my hand, come with me. I want to prove every word I say. I want to love you, baby. Gonna have you every day. Baby, here I am. I'm a girl on the scene. I can give you what you want, but you gotta come home with me. I've got some real good loving in store. When I get through throwing it on you, you gotta come back for more. Girls and things come by the dozen. That ain't nothing but drugstore loving. Good-looking thing, let me light your candle, 'cause baby, I'm sure how to handle. Yes, I am. Baby, I wanna love you, baby. Gotta have it, baby. Give it to me.